we build things that are very complicated to build. And there is a high differentiation on the technology, and that's just required brilliant engineers. And in a world that software differentiation is getting smaller and smaller, in our sector is getting bigger and bigger. And we just need more of that talent as fast as we can find them.
Welcome to the Heidrick Struggles Leadership Podcast. I'm Scott Bay, a principal with our industrial goods and technology practice covering the US and Canadian markets. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Alexis Hennessy.
Thanks, Scott. Alexis Hennessy here, managing partner of Heidrick's global venture capital practice.
Today, we're pleased to be joined by Lior Susan. Lior is an investor, entrepreneur, and the founder and managing partner of Eclipse, a venture capital firm dedicated to partnering with entrepreneurs transforming industries that are critical to people's lives and national economies, such as manufacturing, supply chain, transportation, healthcare, and defense. Prior to Eclipse, Lior and his brother helped to build Entocell, a pioneer in software-defined networking for global telecommunications networks, which was eventually acquired by Cisco. He also spent time at Flex, a multinational manufacturing leader where he led the hardware investment platform, Lab9. Lior is also currently a board member at Bright Machines, Cerebrus, Augury, and Ursa Major, among other companies. Lior, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Let's start with the beginning of the Eclipse story. You founded Eclipse to focus on transforming physical industries at a time when a lot of other investors were more focused on SaaS platforms. What's attracted you and Eclipse to industrial technology throughout your career, and what made you bullish on the need to transform these industries enough to start Eclipse in 2015?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny, I recently told my life story to a friend that is starting a new company, and he kind of say, hey, you're being purpose-built because you grew up on a farm, so that will be an agriculture. Then you went to the military, that will be a defense. You left to start a hardware company with your brother, and you landed Flex to do manufacturing. So you essentially all of your life are doing that. And I thought that I should start by saying I thought about it from youth, about this idea of starting the firm, but of course that will not be the case. No, I think the short version, if you take the world GDP, around 85% of the world GDP is actually in physical industries. That will be your automotive, manufacturing, logistics, defense, etc. And that industries had less than single-digit tech penetration when we started Eclipse just a little bit over 9 years ago. And it was obvious to me as someone that always being passionate about those industries, but also watching technology progression, is that we are going to see a lot of SpaceX and Tesla being built. And I want to be the person that helped build those companies.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like you wanted to capitalize on the dire need for innovation in the physical industries, and perhaps you have the crystal ball of this being ever more prevalent in today's landscape with what's going on in the world from a supply chain and geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, it's feel like it. And, I don't think we were smarter than anyone else. It just was always the case that the majority of the world GDP is in those industries. And we, as an entrepreneurs and operators, always had a passion to those industries. And it was just a matter of time till we are going to see COVID or geopolitics issue or supply chain crisis or AI growth that will require those industries to change dramatically. And that means digital transformation and what we do here.
Lior, I want to ask you about something that we think about a lot and our clients constantly are asking us to look for in the candidates that we bring forward for their different needs. But you've worked in both startups and large companies throughout your career, which is actually pretty unique. And for leaders, what are the biggest differences and similarities in these environments? And how can these leaders who haven't done one or the other best prepare themselves for moving on to that next stage?
I think the thing that we are trying to find the most is like how the brain works. Because when you transform physical industries, it's not like in the world of software that you're coming and creating a new industry. The manufacturing industry is being around for a couple of hundreds of years or thousands of years. Same for construction, same for mining, same for energy. So we are actually using usually a lot of tactics to understand how the brain works for those talents. And we are mainly trying to find folks that have a lot of mindset for disruption and taking risks. And I actually don't think there is a rule if they are coming from big companies or small companies.
And Lior, to build on that point, what leadership traits do you believe are uniquely critical to succeed in the startup landscape in relation to the physical industries? And how are these nuanced depending on the growth stage of the company?
I think a lot of people think that you must be a mega engineers because you are building something in physical industries and it's going to have a very complex solution. It's true, by the way. We actually didn't find that a lot of companies failed there. We actually find that the leadership that usually is missing is the understanding of the go-to-market and your ability to raise capital to support that. And through attracting the capital, you attract the talent. And through attracting the talent, you're actually attracting the customers. So really focusing and putting a lot of emphasis to trying to find people that understand the market, the go-to-market of those very large industries, and the ability to attract enough capital because those businesses can take capital.
Right. It just comes back to the commercial edge and market savviness, customer centricity, things that have been pressure tested over time.
Yeah. And it's not like in the software world, you don't hire like a bunch of folks to selling widgets over the internet for $20K, right? You're working on multi-hundreds of millions of dollars commercial deals. And of course, the people that are buying on the other sides are very savvy. And it needs to feel like someone on the sides of our companies can actually support a multi-years enterprise, very large transactions, because someone will get fired on the customer side if it's not going to work.
Right. And moving on to another point here, there's often the belief that highly regulated industries such as aerospace and defense, for example, are very slow moving, and other investors may have shied away from such deals for that reason. Why is it that Eclipse embraces these types of investments?
Definitely the markets that we operate are regulated industries. The governments have a high intimacy with those markets because naturally the government's in charge to provide us safety and energy and infrastructure. So the government is heavily involved. And yes, those industries historically didn't move in the speed of beats, so in the speeds of software. But I think it's all changed fairly significant from COVID. And I think post-COVID, when essentially the world shut down and we saw how much vulnerabilities we have in our physical industries, and as a result, governments couldn't do their job well, we just saw the speed kicking in. Again, when you play, in our case, both with bits and atoms, it will always move slightly slower than the worlds of software only. But the prize on the other side, because those markets are way bigger, is of course more significant. And as a result, you see the richest man on earth. He actually didn't start a consumer app, he actually start cars and rockets in both industries that will be heavily regulated.
Oh, interesting. So we now come to the hot button topic of the last few years, which is AI. We're seeing more and more industrial technology companies or physical industries embrace physical AI and machine learning, embedding it fully into their operations and products. Yet technology is always evolving, of course. Are there any leadership capabilities that you believe are particularly important to keeping teams and the products they manage up to date when working with these fast evolving technologies?
Yeah, we've been investing in next generation semiconductor infrastructure for 9+ years from the inception of the firm. And right now we are heavily enjoying the tailwinds of AI because the whole infrastructure needs so much innovation. And that's going from compute, networking, storage, power, data centers, etc. On the other side, we are seeing exactly what you're talking about, our companies in physical industries that can take now the AI and actually use it for the worlds of construction or energy or defense and achieving applications, returns of investments and disruption that the customers is just thriving to see more of it. And as a result, of course, a commercial growth. I think in both sides, regardless if you are in the picks and shovels or in the application layer, you are now required to build your platform in a modularity approach in the way that allow you to keep up with the speed of innovation, because that, of course, can be a tailwind, but also a headwind. And we've been doing that for years, and we feel really good about the opportunity.
Lior, I want to shift back and talk about founders specifically. You've been one, you've worked with a number of them throughout your time at Eclipse. When you think about the defining traits of a successful leader as a founder and what those certain traits are specifically, and also what the red flags are for you when you're assessing and figuring out whether or not you're going to back a founder.
Yeah, Alexis, our founder is actually not the typecast of what Silicon Valley was so familiar in the last 20 years or so. You know, the hoodies, drop off from Stanford's, a bunch of pizza boxes on the floor out of your garage with a pajama writing code. It's actually very different than the founders that we are investing and working with. Our founders are actually in their late 30s, mid 40s, worked in some of those companies like SpaceX, like NVIDIA, like Amazon, leaving now their job to actually building their own business in physical industries and actually bringing quite a lot of operating experience. So they might be first-time entrepreneur, but they're not the first-time managers. It's not like, I think, what we were so familiar from the world of software and consumer and fintech. And that's actually required us, when we are looking for those typecasts, to look for different things. Those people usually actually have families, and they don't necessarily will do things in the words of the 20 years old hoodie type of a founder. But I would say that the areas that we always focus is how much the founders have an experience with the market is trying to disrupt. And there is always like too much or too little. You don't want them to come and like in the same as the incumbents work. On the other end, you don't want them to come and make statements that those very large industries will not like. Their ability to attract capital and their ability to hire, of course, the best people in the world. And now I don't think that those three things will be different than any other investors, but the flavors that we are looking around them, I think it's actually very unique and different than maybe other industries will look for.
Yeah, really interesting to hear the distinction between industries, right? And how that affects what you're looking for.
Yeah. Give you an example. We signed a $1.2 billion commercial deal end of last year with one of our companies that I was involved. And, the CEO that signed with us the deal, it's a Fortune 500. He'll look in our eyes and say, guys, don't screw this thing up. If you're going to screw this thing up, we will miss our earnings because we're going to move 100% of our dependency of the manufacturing to you guys. And I just think that they will not do it with someone that just drop off from the university and start a company.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, bringing it back to some of the turmoil that you were describing earlier in terms of what we're going through globally, geopolitically, everything that's been thrown at us. As you think about your experience in the current environment, what are the 2 or 3 leadership capabilities that you believe will become more important in the coming few years for VC investors and executives in VC-backed companies? What's your prediction?
So I would say in our sectors, the 3 thing is the intimacy, I think where we actually start about. One of the headwinds is the government's involvement, right, and how regulated. Also can be a massive tailwind if you got the right governments in the seat. So I think we need to have a high degree of intimacy of relationship with the governments in the countries that we operate, as well just understanding how they think. So I think the government know-how, it's becoming not a nice to have, it's a must to have. I think access to scale capital. Our companies are going after 85% of the world GDP, call it $100 trillion, give or take. You need capital in order to disrupt that size of a TAM. And our ability to help them with scale capital, not only in equity, debt, financing, government funding, etc., it's becoming a more and more important element. And the last but not least is the talent, right? We build things that are very complicated to build. And there is a high differentiation on the technology, and that's just required brilliant engineers. And in a world that software differentiation is getting smaller and smaller, in our sector is getting bigger and bigger. And we just need more of that talent as fast as we can find them.
Well, Lior, you've been so generous with your time, answering all of our questions. This has been incredibly insightful and enlightening, giving us a lot to go and think about. So thanks for investing the time with us, and thanks for the thoughtful answers.
I appreciate you guys having me, and thanks for the partnership, helping us finding incredible talent.
Happy to do it.